Hello and welcome to the Georgia HMIS 2019 HUD Data Standards training video. In this video I'll be going over some changes that's coming to our HMIS on October 1st, 2019. So part of these changes are part of what HUD calls data standards. Every so often there will be new data standards that come out, and so then those changes will be implemented into an HMIS by the vendor. There's a document that can be really helpful in seeing the way that HMS is programmed. So both the new changes that are coming that I'll be talking about today, as well as the way everything else operates in HMIS from a HUD standard perspective, can be found in a document if you Google HUD data standards. And the first result should be the HUD Exchange website. And if you click on this, you will have the Data Dictionary, latest and greatest. Now it will say 2020, although this is, as I mentioned, effective October 1st, 2019. You can also find the current Data Dictionary listed right here below. But again, what we're going to be focusing on today would be found in the dictionary here. So you've got the dictionary. This is a fairly technical document, but it is going to list all the fields that are in HMIS, that are required to be in HMIS, and it'll also list information along with those fields. So for instance, I'm going to click on income and sources, because we know that's a field in HMIS, and this is going to list all of the different types of income that is required to be able to be recorded in HMIS. And also, if I scroll down a little lower here, I'd be able to see what funding sources are required to capture this information, and even what project types. Is it for head of household and adults, or for everybody? I can see that information here. I can also see, is it required just at project start, or update assessments, or annual, or project exit. So this kind of gives you a framework of really how HMS is required to function. There's also the HMS Data Standards Manual, and I feel like this one, especially for caseworkers, might even be a little bit more relevant. It's still going to have the same fields listed, so we'd still see all of the different fields that are found within HMIS, but for instance, I'm going to let's click on income and sources in this document, and you're going to actually get a lot of verbiage and context of how this particular field is supposed to be recorded in the system. And so I think this could really give some good insight to caseworkers on how they should be recording this data. So we can see here it has a lot more narrative parts, although it still does have the more technical spreadsheet style sheet here as well. So between the two of those, between the two of these documents, though, you really should have be able to have a good kind of grasp of what's in HMIS and what's required. And so I kind of consider these the Bible of HMIS, if you will. These documents really kind of drive that. So I've mentioned there's some HUD changes coming out with these new data standards. Now also, Acovia is just making some changes to ClientTrack as well on October 1st. And so those are just some changes that they felt like would be beneficial to everyone, and they wanted to go ahead and make. And then we also, as Georgia, are taking the opportunity to make a few changes to the system as well on that same date. So in this training video, I'll be going over all three of those scenarios: the HUD changes, the Acovia specific changes, and then the Georgia ones. So now let's go ahead and jump into the HUD changes. So the first thing I want to look at is prior living situation. So this is found on the universal data assessment that comes up when you are doing an enrollment for a client. So I'm not going to go do an entire enrollment for a client, but just to save time, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the universal data assessment. This should be something you're already used to seeing. And here we have the prior living situation. So if I pull that up here, one of the changes is just really slight. Now these client doesn't know and client refused and data not collected are found down here in their own little other category. So that's just more of a visual change. I did want to point out though, up here under emergency shelter, Now this includes RY-funded host home shelters. So if a client is coming from that situation, you'd want to make sure to choose this option as it's appropriate. But then also there's a new option here of host home non-crisis. So you want to make sure we are using both of these correctly and choosing the most appropriate response. Other options that are new here are the rental by client in a public housing unit option, and also rental by client with HCV voucher, tenant or project based. So anytime there's changes like this, we would just want to bring it to your attention, make sure you are aware of it, that we're gathering data in a way that's going to line up with these options. So for instance, if you use paper intake forms, you would want to make sure all of these options are listed on it. You would never want to have an intake form that just said rental by client or just be asking the client if they're just in a rental situation. Again, we want to be able to get to this level of detailed information, and this is all, of course, per HUD. There is an option that has actually gone away under prior living situation, and it used to be under the homeless situation category, and it is interim housing. So you'll notice interim housing is no longer an option here. Now that was a very specific prior living situation that shouldn't have really been used as much as it has been in Georgia. And actually, I think kind of across the board, HUD saw that, and so that's one reason I think they went ahead and did away with it. So you won't see it as an option going forward. But one thing I did want to mention about that is if your organization has been using that interim housing option as a common prior living situation, HUD's suggestion there is that you would actually go into those older assessments and update them to a more appropriate response out of the current different listings here. So one thing we did to kind of help you locate any assessments like that is if you go to the home workspace and go under custom reports and then client reports, you'll see interim housing assessments. This is a report where if you will clear out this max rows, or otherwise you'll only get up to 10 responses, then you can click view results or click export if you want it in an Excel format. But what this is going to do is it's going to look in the system, and anytime your organization or anyone at your organization has recorded a prior living situation of interim housing, it would be listed here. So you'd be able to see that client ID, you'd be able to see that enrollment, the enrollment dates, and easily navigate, locate those, and then go in and change it from interim housing to a different response. If you have any issues with that or need any help, we have trained COC admins on that, so you can always submit an issue ticket and they'll be glad to help you with that further. So that covered the changes of the prior living situation question. I also wanted to look at exit destinations though, because in the same way that prior living situation changed a little bit, when we are exiting a client, we are also going to see those same changes reflected here. So for instance, emergency shelter, we'll see the RY-funded host home, we'll see the host home non-crisis down here, we'll see the public housing, and the HCV voucher. So we also want to make sure not only are we capturing that level of detail when we are enrolling clients, but also when they are leaving our project, that we are recording the most appropriate response. Next, I want to look at barriers. So barriers are, of course, another form you should all be used to seeing anytime you do an enrollment workflow. So I'm just going to go ahead and go straight to that barriers assessment. So here we have it here. So one thing we know that historically, anytime we choose yes for a barrier, that the client has that barrier, it's going to then require this follow-up question of condition is indefinite and substantially impairs ability to live independently. The one thing that's changing here is that for developmental disability and HIV/AIDS, it's no longer going to require this follow-up question. So we can see if I choose yes on either of these, that other question does not pop up, so we don't have to collect that data. And the reason being is HUD kind of considers these always indefinite, and so that they don't want us to have to go in and answer the next question about it. So one thing to kind of think about though, as far as it relates to, or as far as this relates to HMIS logic, is that, for instance, when I did this enrollment initially, it asked disabling condition early on in the enrollment process. It actually asked that on the universal data assessment, and we choose either yes or no. So I chose no when I was doing that enrollment. But now here, if I chose this barrier as yes and I chose this yes, so it would have to be yes there and yes here. This would then conflict with this previous answer, because HUD says if they've got a condition that's indefinite, then disabling condition should be yes as well. So actually, if I try to click save here, I would get an error message. If I hover over that, I'll get the message about that my barrier I just recorded conflicts with disabling condition status. But then it also lets me know if I click save again, then the form is going to automatically update disabling condition to yes for me. So it's going to go ahead and fix that problem. In the same way, if I were to just choose yes for a disabling disability, developmental disability or HIV/AIDS, if I just choose yes on that, even though this question is not asked anymore, it is going to go ahead and use the logic that disabling condition should be yes as well. And so that would be something that you would naturally see as you're interacting with this form. So just wanted to make sure that everyone kind of has a heads up of that. Next, I wanted to get into some project-specific changes. So while the changes I just went over would kind of affect all projects in the system, these are just going to affect specific ones. So the first one I want to talk about is changes coming for RYE projects. So that's Runaway Homeless Youth Projects. So one change is going to be when you're doing an intake, you are now going to be required to record pregnancy status for all females that are marked head of household regardless of age. So previously you were required to record this for anytime you had a female head of household if they were 18 or over. Now it's going to be regardless of age. So for instance, this is a 12-year-old I enrolled to a RYE project, but they are marked as a female and head of household. So we can see the asterisk beside this. It is going to make sure we are capturing that question. So again, if you're doing paper intakes, you're going to want to make sure that you are requiring that question as well in all cases. Another change with RYE is found on the RYE entry assessment. So I'm going to pull that up. Again, these are all things that come up naturally in your workflow, so it's not anything that you have to remember to pull up in the system. As far as if you're just doing the intake straight into ClientTrack, the workflow is going to make sure that all of these are included for you. So a new option here is going to be other under sexual orientation, and then if you do choose that, then you'll also have the please describe text box here, and it will require you to type in something there. Also, in the same regards, or kind of related, is a change for the COC, if you have a COC-funded Youth Homeless Demonstration Program project. If you have one of those projects, a new required question for you is going to be sexual orientation. So that was not something that was previously required, but will be something that you see on intakes after the October 1st date. For VA GPD projects as grant per diem, specifically funded under the low demand and case management / housing relocation grant, so real specific VA GPD grant. If you have a project though funded by that, you are now going to be required to record the employment status. And so I want to just pull that up here, so you kind of know what that looks like, know what those questions are, and make sure you're gathering that data. Next, I want to talk about PATH and SSVF projects. So both of those project types now will require a DV, or domestic violence assessment. So for instance, here's a PATH project, and while you're doing your workflows, you're now going to see the domestic violence assessment automatically come up, and it will be required. And just as a note, this is one that does have dependent questions depending on if it's a yes or no. So for instance, if I do a yes here, then I'm going to have when experience occurred, and also currently fleeing, yes or no. Also for PATH, there's a change to one of the options you have on the PATH enrollment form, and so I'm going to go ahead and get to the PATH enrollment form, because for PATH providers, there's some extra options they have that other projects don't, and that is these questions right here. And one of those is client became enrolled in PATH, which is a yes or no answer. If I choose no now, there is a new response here of unable to locate client. And that's going to be under the reason not enrolled in PATH. So that will be a new response that our PATH providers see. And this next change is probably one of the more prominent changes in the system, but it just affects PATH, street outreach, and coordinated entry projects. And it's a substantial enough of a change. We actually have a separate video that we've created just for it. So if you are a PATH agency, street outreach projects, or coordinated entry, you would need to watch that video as well. But what it's going to be covering is this new assessment that HUD has called Current Living Situation. So you're going to see it in Client Track as referred to as Living Situation. We can actually see a menu option for it here. But in a nutshell, what it is it's replacing the assessment that was called Contacts. And so anytime, historically, for any street outreach project, when you went in and enrolled somebody, you would record a contact. And then every time you interacted with that client going forward, you would record another contact service. And those would show up under the standard service form, so you could easily see it here on the dashboard. Well, that's no longer going to be the case. We're not going to be recording those contact services. Instead, we're going to be recording these new living situation assessments. I did want to touch on, though, that this could affect everybody in one way or another. But what I was thinking about is, so let's say you're a agency and you're not a coordinated entry, you don't deal with coordinated entry projects, you don't do PATH, you don't do street outreach, but maybe as you're working with clients, you will check out the services here to look at the last time they had a contact service, from the local PATH provider. So you could kind of see if this client's still on the streets, if they're still being serviced. Well, of course, you won't be able to see these you won't be able to go in and track clients that way anymore, because those contact services won't be being recorded. So what we did to kind of help everybody out, though, in that regards, is we added this living situation history form down here for everybody. And this is where you'll actually be able to see those living situation assessments that have been recorded. So this would be an area I feel like will start getting populated as clients are interacting with their PATH providers, with street outreach providers, and now with CE providers, because this will be something that's now required for coordinated entry as well. And so it's going to be basically anytime one of those projects interacts with a client, they're going to record what is their current living situation. So you'll actually kind of see a history of that. And so I think this could be some really good information, which is one reason we threw it up on the dashboard for you. But again, as a reminder, if you are one of those 3 project types, you will want to watch the additional video we have on that as we go into how you actually go in and record those assessments. So that's going to cover all of our HUD changes. Now I'm going to get into some changes that Ecovia just made in ClientTrack. So one, you might have noticed that while I'm on the client's dashboard here, the different enrollments the client has are now broken into categories of the different project types. So we can see this client right now is active in 2 different homelessness prevention projects. Here we have a couple service only projects they are enrolled in. And so this just kind of helps you quickly glance and see what this client's situation is as far as programs they're enrolled in. And then down here we'll have the projects where they've already been exited, and then those will also be categorized by project type as well. So hopefully that will just be something to kind of help you as you're working with clients. There's also an additional column here. So we have active case members. Now previously we had the case members column, which just lets you know how many clients enrolled into a project. What this lets you know is how many clients are still active in that project enrollment. So for instance, here we can quickly see that there were 2 clients enrolled at the same time to this project, but now there's only 1. In this case, the client we've got pulled up right now, they are the ones that have already been exited, but we can see there's still a family member that's still enrolled. This could be really helpful in cases where maybe you have exited 1 family member, or maybe 4 or 5, but there's still an extra one that you didn't go all the way through the workflow and they didn't get exited. You'd be able to quickly identify that by just comparing the 2 numbers here. A few other changes would be if we click the action button beside enrollment. So the icons have changed a little bit here. So if you click this action button and you don't immediately see an option you're trying to locate, just take a little extra time to look through the labels here, because the option's probably still here. It just might look a little different. We do have a new option here though of edit enrollment. So previously, if there was ever a time you needed to go in and update enrollment information, and when I say enrollment information, I don't mean all of the assessments that you collect when you do an enrollment, but just on the enrollment page itself. So that could be you need to change to the enrollment date. It's also where move-in dates recorded for housing projects. It's where those path specific enrollment fields are, like are they enrolled in PATH, yes or no, what's the date of engagement, things like that. Before though, there wasn't really a quick way to get to that form, so what we'd have you do is start the edit project entry workflow, which would kind of start the workflow process. You'd have to skip through a couple forms, make the changes you need to, and then exit out of the workflow. What they've done here is they've just made this edit enrollment button that takes you directly to the enrollment information, and then here we'd be able to go in and change things like project start date, relationship to head of household. If there, depending on the project type, if there were additional fields here, we'd see those. We would also see exit information here as well, as far as exit destination and exit reason. And so we'd be able to go in and quickly update that and then just click save without ever having to go into workflow. Also, a slight change you're going to see is for someone who has already been exited, you're now going to see the option of edit exit workflow. Before, anytime you pull up the action button on enrollment, you would see exit the enrollment regardless if the client's actually been exited or not. So if you did need to go all the way through the workflow again to maybe update some assessments, we would just have you click on exit the enrollment again. Well, now they've just made a little visual change where if the person's already exited, it changes into edit exit workflow, but it's still going to do the same thing as you were used to by clicking on exit workflow. And that's going to cover the Ecovia specific changes. And finally, last but not least, are just changes that we in Georgia decided to make in the system, and hopefully these will make your life easier and not harder. So one of those is that you're only going to see one project intake button here. Before we also had a RAI intake button for our RAI providers. Well, now everyone's just going to use this one project intake button. So it's been part of the process of us trying to consolidate as much as we can. If you've been around a while, you might have used to remember that we also had an entire another work group for street outreach projects, and we kind of consolidated that down into this one work group with this one project intake button. And this is kind of along the same lines as well. So now we've got it where regardless of your funding source, if you're a federally funded project, you'll be able to click on project intake and it's going to bring in all the assessments that you need. Now, if you do have any projects set up as getting non-federal funding and you're using the non-federally funded work group, you'd still need to do that. But again, for anyone that's getting any kind of federal funding at all you have to worry about is, as far as enrolling clients, is clicking on the project intake. Next, I wanted to go over some changes we made with this button here. So this is what we call the carousel button. When you click this, it would allow you to switch between home and client workspace. Well, now you're going to have a couple more options here. And so we see that there is now an issues workspace that you have access to. What this is going to do is, by default, when you go to it, it's going to bring up the My Submitted Issues form. So these are just issue tickets that you have submitted in the system. And before you could get to this, you would get to it from the home workspace by clicking on My Submitted Issues. But now you have an area over here, an entire workspace you can go over and you can see all those issues. Some additions we made on this form is we added last note date and last note by columns here. What that's going to tell you is when was the last note left on one of these issue tickets, and if there was a note left, who left it. So we hope that this will kind of give you a quick look, the ability to have a quick look and see if maybe you submitted an issue ticket that you've been waiting to hear back a response from, and of course you should have gotten an email notification anytime there was a response, so maybe you overlooked that. But regardless, you could come in here and see when the last note was left and who it was left by. We also added the issue ticket number search here, so if you typed in an issue ticket number, it's going to automatically pull that up here. So it just helps you to quickly locate a specific issue ticket that you have submitted. As always, so by default this form will just show tickets that are either marked in any of these categories. It's not going to show you ones that have already been marked closed. And the only way a issue ticket would be marked closed is if whoever worked on the issue ticket, whether it's a COC admin or it could have been one of us system admins, that we marked it fixed and then you went in and verified it, then it goes ahead and is marked closed. But if you want to see those as well, you can also tick that there, and then you would actually see every single issue ticket you've ever submitted regardless of the issue ticket status. Another menu option we added here was My Organization's Submitted Issues. And what this is going to do is, based on the organization you're logged into at the time, it's going to show you any issue tickets that have been submitted by anyone else at your organization. So this could be helpful if you're having a problem in the system and maybe one of your coworkers has already submitted an issue ticket on it. You can come here and quickly identify it. And these have the same additional columns as well, and the issue ticket search feature here. We've also added this button here, the View Edit Selected Issue. What this will do is it will pull up whatever the last issue ticket you had selected, it will pull that up, which you always will see that listed here in the top bar right here. So if I click here, it's just going to go ahead and pull that issue ticket up. So it can just kind of make navigating it a little easier if you've maybe moved away from an issued ticket and you're on, a different form here. You can just click here and go right back to that last one. Another brand new workspace you're going to have access to is providers. This is really going to be relevant for any agencies that are set up to receive referrals. And what this will allow you to do is if you click Find Provider, you'll be able to locate your provider, or basically it will list your organization if you have been set up as being a referral provider. And you'd be able to pull that up, and then you'd be able to click Provider Dashboard, and then see a list of any referrals that have been made to your organization. So again, this isn't going to apply for everyone, but it will be at least an option that everyone sees when they click on the carousel button. So that is going to be all the changes that are coming. Again, they're going to be happening October 1st, 2019 in our Georgia HMIS system. If you do have any questions about those changes beforehand, or if once the date hits you run into any issues with these problems, with these new additions, as always, you can go in and click Help and report an issue and go ahead and submit that as an issue ticket, and we'll have a COC admin assist you. Hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.